Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to yet another webinar from Data Platform Geeks. Now, all of you already probably know about today's session, and that's why you're here, which is bedazzling your bookmarks and buttons. And this is all about Power BI. And we couldn't have anyone better than Reid Heavens, who happens to be a Microsoft MVP focusing on Power BI. Before I hand over the stage to Reid, I will quickly just talk about DPS 2021. This is something that you already know, but maybe just 2 minutes. Data Platform Virtual Summit 2021 was announced this year in the month of May, and registrations are happening from all over the world. As I speak to you, we have crossed about 1,500 registrations from 58 countries. So that's really huge for us. The best thing that we have done this year is we have made the summit complimentary for anyone who books a training class. When we say training class, we mean the pre-cons and the post-cons collectively. These are 8-hour virtual classroom training. The best part is you can attend live, and we also share class recordings with you. I want to highlight that not too many events and conferences give you the class recordings, but for the benefit of the community, and we know this is virtual, we give you 12 months streaming access to the live class, which means it gets recorded and you have access to that. You can watch the recordings as many times as you want, over and over again. You get exclusive content as well. 8 hours is divided into 4 hours each day, and these are 2 consecutive days. So the dates are September 8 and 9 for the pre-cons, and 21 and 22 for the post-cons. Anyway, check out the dates on dataplatformvirtualsummit.com. The link is in the chat window. For all of you who are attending today's webinar, there is a discount coupon that you can use, which is save20. That gives you $20 off on your cart value, whatever it is. We have 15 sessions lined up for you, 15 training classes, and we are covering a wide range of topics in Azure Data and AI stack. Of course, when I say Azure Data and AI, I also mean advanced analytics. And of course, Power BI is one of our key focuses out there. So AI, machine learning, data deployment, managed instance, Azure SQL, SQL Server, performance tuning, big data clusters, DAX, SQL developer best practices. There's a lot of stuff, including PowerShell as well. But there's one special class that I want to talk about today because Reid is there with us, which is demystifying design principles and building impactful reports in Power BI. Let's get straight to the point. If you are serious about Power BI, you should attend this class because we have got incredible feedback always whenever Reid had done training classes for us. And Reid was in India when we did the last in-person event. And all of you know, last 2 years there has been no in-person. So we were virtual last year as well and this year. So we are very glad to have Reid back with us. So make sure you explore his class. Just log on to dataplatformvirtualsummit.com. Explore. He also has a video out there where he explains what he's covering in his class. There are modules, abstract, everything listed out. At DPS, content has always been our focus, and you know the tracks that we are covering, everything in the data analytics and AI hood. And this is a community driven conference, and we invite the best speakers from the community and the best speakers from Microsoft, and we get together and put up the best content for you, which is highly curated. And you will be very happy to know that if you log on to the website, more than 100 breakout sessions are already announced. We still are 40 days away from the event, but probably 80 to 90% of the content is already out there for you to browse and explore and evaluate. Remember, you are not buying any ticket for Data Platform Summit, the event, because you get that free complimentary with the training class. That's it. I'm not going to waste too much of your time. So talk to your managers and company and get sponsored. Come on board as quickly as possible. Remember, the prices are going up from August 5th. Well, with this, without any further delay, we hand over the stage to Reid Heavens, our rock star for the day. Reid, over to you.
Wonderful. Okay. So everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I'm actually very excited to talk about this presentation. It's a kind of a fun grab bag of a lot of things that I've learned over the years, especially with bookmarks and buttons. There are two things that have a lot of versatility besides, activating a bookmark when it comes to a button or just simply applying some filters, which bookmarks originally were intended for. So really cool stuff we'll be learning overall. A little bit of background about myself. As it's already been kind of explained to you, I'm one of the MVPs for Microsoft. Essentially what that means is I create a lot of community content, whether or not it's through presentations like this, or doing YouTube videos that I do on my YouTube channel, answering forum questions, in general, anything that is kind of community contributions that just go back to helping the broader community at large learn the tool sets and to just help them progress with reporting and analytics, specifically under the business intelligence branch for Microsoft. So that's something that I've been doing now for many years. I've been doing data analytics for about 10 years now. I've had and owned my own business for the last 8, and I've been working full-time under it for about the last 4. And I've been doing a lot of things with development and also teaching as well at the university here in Seattle, Washington, where I'm based. I teach at UW. And overall, I like some of the most enjoyable experiences that I have really comes from community interactions like I have with these presentations today, virtual, but slowly starting to work my way back into in-person presentations and conversations. I'm very excited to actually be able to come back to hopefully DPS next year in person. It's a great excuse for me to travel. One, I have a travel bug, certainly, and I just really like to hang out with people in a room. There's a level of crowd interaction that you and vibe that you get that you can't really get online. But we deal with what we can today. So, and one thing that last thing I'll mention about myself is I very much kind of leaned into the idea of kind of aesthetics and design. I just found that years ago that people continually started to rely on it more and more as they saw the reports and everything else that I built. And it was just kind of something that I fell naturally into. And there's not nearly as many people out there who are focusing on aesthetics and design versus there's a lot of people who do good data modeling and build good quality data to go into reports, but the reports themselves fall flat because maybe the right visuals weren't chosen. They were a bit too noisy and cluttered. They're not organized in a way that makes sense. The right features aren't being used. It's not telling the proper story. So that's kind of where my niche and my specialty ended up becoming, just because it's something that I've enjoyed, and I've found that there's a large market for making sure that not only do the reports look pretty, but they also actually tell meaningful and impactful information that makes sense. But for our presentation topic today, and let me move this little bar over. Here we go. Get that out of the way. We're going to be talking about a lot of things with bookmarks and buttons. The demonstrations that you see here, with most of my talks, I like to actually make them very modular to have a lot of like snack size discussions and everything, which also means that I can scale it down all the way to 30 minutes. I can scale it up to probably an hour and a half to 2 hours, but it allows me to fit it in the time frame that the conference or presentation that I have is available. So we'll get through probably most of these, not necessarily all of them, but I'll also have links and resources to additional information if there's some we haven't covered as well at the very end. But as you can see here, many different topics that will be covered related to bookmarks, buttons, and designs and principles. So with that though, most of the talk that I'm giving, excuse me, today is going to be just a demonstration. So I'll go ahead and exit out of the slide deck and just actually start diving into it. Okay. There we go. All right. Perfect. And so the first one that we're going to have here is a very interesting perspective on how to utilize bookmarks to give a unique user interaction. And one thing I want to mention on this is that with a lot of things that come up for ideas that I have for either videos or presentation topics, they very often come up during interactions that I have with clients. It's one reason that I still like to develop. I know there are other MVPs like myself who kind of mostly entirely just stopped developing and entirely focused on training. And I wouldn't say either path is right or wrong, but for me personally, I feel like a lot of the learning and the creative juices flow when I'm still developing, where a client comes to me with like, hey, how do I make this? And all right, well, I would never have thought of doing this thing with that feature that you're asking for, but let me try to figure out a way to make it work. And this was one of them where somebody wanted kind of a hierarchy dimension toggle for the entire report. For those of you who've used Power BI, you probably know that visuals themselves have hierarchies where I can go between different levels, and it allows me to drill up and down. But there's no way to like sync the visuals together. I can't collectively choose both of them and then have it go up or down. It's one action at a time. So for this user, they didn't want to have to come to 4 different visuals and go down to each one and have those individually control the hierarchies. It's a lot of clicks to get them all to align. So instead, what they wanted is they wanted to have a button that allowed them to do that. So now I can click on these buttons up here. All takes me to quarter all at once, takes me to the month level, or it takes me to the day level. The actual level is less important. It really is just showing you that I have assigned some type of a hierarchy into the visuals themselves. In this case, you can just see that there's a date hierarchy over there, but this could have been a product hierarchy or anything else. But what I have done is put the same hierarchy in multiple visuals on a page and then created a bookmark that then navigates between those with 1 click rather than 3 or 4. So it just essentially allows us to create a macro that accommodates the end user's needs with fewer and fewer mouse clicks. And that's the goal for most bookmarks in general, is very often reducing the number of clicks to get to set action that they're looking for. So I want to kind of walk through a few parts of this and explain kind of each component and how they are made to understand this, because we both have the actual controls, that is the bookmark themselves, but also you might notice at the top, I've done some little fun design and formatting with the buttons themselves. So each button up here kind of has an on and off toggle. When I click quarter, it looks like that's been selected because it's darker. It doesn't have any effect when I hover over it or click on it. Next, I'm going to go ahead and lock these for a sec. There we go. Same thing with month. If I actually hover over it, you have an inactive state, an on hover state, and a press state. So it looks active until I click it, and then it changes color. And now it basically, via color formatting, is indicating on the page which one has been activated. And there's also a couple of tricks on here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on, where are we at? View and selection. Perfect. Okay. I'm going to open up this and I'm going to open up my visuals. So observe all the items in here, both for visuals and for buttons, and then watch what happens when I select day. Notice that I have a quarter selected, not selected. So I actually have 2 versions of each button in here, and that's how I get it to go from light to dark. So I'm actually going to hide the other day one. If I hide this, that's completely gone. So I have a unselected one, meaning I can still click this to toggle the day. And inversely, I also have the other one that's placed on that same location for the dark one. So each time I actually change the perspective of any one of these, I'm actually hiding the clickable one, and I'm unhiding the one that's basically the activated version of that button that I've created. One way that I also get them to place very appropriately on top of each other quickly and easily, let me go ahead and turn back off lock objects. I'm going to copy and paste this. There's something that I've always used when I develop, which is called snap to grid. With that on, every movement, every alignment, if I was to resize this even, it's always by 8 pixels. So all I have to do is, very quickly take any new button, put it on top of the old one, and they are pixel perfect, snapped on top of each other. Previously, to do that, to get that such level of fine alignment, you'd have to come to the X and Y position, width and height, and you'd have to adjust all the values, to be identical to the other one. But with Snap to Grid, it does that for you. So, pretty much anytime I'm doing any type of development with alignment, I always have that turned on. And anytime I want a space between anything, it's just 1 snap away. So I get an 8 pixel width that's perfectly between everything. So a quick little hack that really saves you a ton of time when it comes to making sure that items are perfectly aligned with each other. But yeah, let's go ahead now, like I said, and I want to zoom out a little bit, observe the hidden and non-hidden in here. And I'm going to select day, and you can see that it went from selected to unselected. So the top part basically for this bookmark, it's doing 2 things. It is toggling the selections of my buttons up here at the top, and it is also toggling the hierarchies. So we're going to create a test bookmark so you can see the setup process for doing this onto the page. And I'll also talk about a few considerations when it comes to developing bookmarks as well. So open up my bookmark pane. You can already see that I have 3 bookmarks in there for quarter, month, and day. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the environment of what I want the snapshot to look like for my month level. So to start with, I'm going to move all of my hierarchies up to the month level, because that is the level that I want the visuals to be at for my month bookmark that I'm going to create for this example. And I need to set up the buttons in here. The selectable day one needs to be visible, and then the selected one here needs to also be switched. So I'm going to go to the day one over there, hide that. unhide this. And I'll talk about the button formatting after I've made the bookmark. And then similarly, I'm going to flip this one here. So month selected. There we go. Hide that one and unhide that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the date buttons group. And by the way, when I do this, if I select here, it automatically selects everything inside of this for me when it captures the bookmark. So you don't actually have to go. And essentially, I will show, wrong one. There we go. The equivalent of doing this, selecting those, that's the same effect if I just simply select this as part of my selection. And I will mention why it's so important to select certain items when you're capturing a bookmark. So I'm going to select that. And then I only care about these 1, 2, 3, and 4 visuals on the page. So that is this one, this one, this one, and this one. So I have chosen to specifically select just my buttons and just these. I also have like a background object in there and a few others, but I'm wrapping my bookmark around a specific selection that is related to the bookmark that I'm capturing. So I'll click add. I'm going to rename this to just month test. There we go. And here's the important part. I'm going to choose selected visuals, which means that the bookmark is only going to update what I had selected in my selection pane. So that means that it's only going to care about these and these. It is ignoring anything else that is on my page. So that enforces that there is nothing else that's happening that will accidentally get updated or reset or toggled or anything else, because you want to configure a bookmark to work safely and not accidentally reset something. You know, you don't want to have a user apply filter and have that reset. You don't want to have a filter that's been applied that then snaps back to that filter every time, because the bookmark captures everything on your page, every filters pane selection that you've made, every slicer selection, every visibility, because it completely snapshots the entire page and everything that you've done on there. So this enforces that it's only updating the things that you specifically care about for this bookmark, because bookmarks are amazing, but they do require very specific configurations to make sure that they work the correct way. All right. Wrong zoom. Here we go. Okay. So selected visuals. And I'm also going to toggle a couple of these. So data, by the way, that is everything related to the filters pane. That is everything for slicers. This also, though, applies to levels of a hierarchy. It's not really filtering because you're just choosing a different level. You're not actually adding a filter, but it is part of the of that setting. Personally, it would be nice if there was maybe a fourth one, or somehow actually instead that was included in display, because again, it's not quite technically a filter, but that it needs to be enabled because that will update our visuals and their hierarchy levels. Display, if I hover over that, applies the visual display state, which is whether or not they're visible or not. As a little FYI, it also is the thing that captures your focus mode, and it also is the thing that captures your spotlight. Those two features are also part of display. So when you do that with the visual for the spotlight and or a focus mode, those are both part of that display capture. That actually is going to come back and in relevance in one of our other demos as well. But just to mention that. So that needs to be checked. Current page, that doesn't matter to me. This bookmark is not designed to navigate me back to this page. It's only ever going to be activated on this page. So I can turn that off. So now we have proper configuration, and it's a note to yourself later. Whenever I look at this bookmark in the future, I will know that it is only caring about data and display and selected visuals. Also, as I mentioned, there is no button that shows you the properties of the bookmark. There's nothing that will ever tell you in the future what this was related to in the display capture. So sometimes, honestly, what I will do is I'll take a screenshot, and then I'll do something usually like this, where I will document this in OneNote or somewhere and say, these are the things that was related to this bookmark. So I will document it myself and make some notes about it, because there is no other way to come back. And other than you just trying to remember, there's nothing that will tell you, oh yeah, this bookmark is related to these and this. You would have to know it yourself. So I recommend when you are making these, go and put a documentation somewhere to indicate what these bookmarks were doing. All right. Otherwise, the best way you can find out is you click the bookmark and see what happens, and then you have a best guess about that. I've asked Microsoft someday to somehow provide some metadata about what is in the capture state, but that's just not something that is available today. All right. So we've set it up. Let's go ahead and toggle this. Here we go. I'm going to click quarter. So now let's come back and we're going to select month test over here. So select that. And there we go. We can see that it toggled my buttons and it also navigated this back in. So we've seen how to capture the bookmark. And the last thing that I will mention, so you can actually see what I've done for the formatting on these buttons, and then we'll pause for questions before the next demo. But let me go ahead and select one of these buttons over here. There we go. And I'll put you over here so we can zoom in a bit. So let's just discuss how I formatted it to, have this nice clickable, fancy little button. So the things that are great about buttons is they're highly configurable, and they have 3 primary states that can be configured. I've kind of mentioned the words a couple of times for these. So what we have is we have our native state, which is the default. That is what the button looks like for this setting when your mouse is not touching it. When your mouse is hovering over it, that is called the on hover state. And that essentially then now just displays the formatting that happens when you are hovering over it. And then the third one is the on press, what happens when you actually click on it. So it gives you the ability to create, like a CSS or web-like toggle button with something and designs that can make it look like it's clickable and you're pressing it. So you can give the user, essentially a feedback visually that the button is doing something. And for me, I don't do anything with the text, but what I do is I use color to indicate the button press. So the default state is the lighter blue. On hover, notice that is a darker blue that is matching that. And then the press is an even darker one. And there's that third color. And the difference between that and this one, there we go, is that all 3 states for this guy are just the same blue. So the default, hover, press, all the 3 same colors. So it just is essentially acting like it's been pressed and it is staying pressed. So there's no more interaction. It's not, it doesn't change or have any effect. So it essentially looks inactive as far as any action against it for the end user, and it is remaining that dark color. That is, how I decided to have a formatting to achieve that effect. And then as well, you want to just make sure that there's no action assigned to it. So if they actually do click it, it's not actually going to activate any bookmark. The effect can also be done if you simply just turn it off as well. But the reason I like to have my action on is I actually include a tooltip, which is selected time perspective. And then these ones say toggle day view, toggle quarter level. So I have words that are in the tooltips to help indicate that, yes, this can be clicked, or no, this has already been selected. So one further little bit of information to indicate to the user that this has been clicked. So we've kind of seen a unique way to format use the bookmarks to actually toggle hierarchy levels. And we've also seen how to format buttons to create kind of an active and inactive button effect. But overall, before I move on to the next demonstration, are there any questions on this one? I'll pull up the chat on my other window just in case. Yeah, so what you can do is feel free to drop them into the chat window, and while I'm waiting to see if there's any, I'll go ahead and pull up my next presentation as well. Demonstration, better said. All right. Cool. All right. I don't think I see any questions at the moment. So I kind of foreshadowed this one a little bit. Excuse me, I had to adjust myself. In the discussion about display and what things can be captured as part of the display state. So you'll notice over here that I have a different little icon that's up here in the corner. Now, watch what happens when I click this. Nope, wrong. I had the Windows key down. Control, click. There we go. So what I've actually done is I've added an icon onto the page that pops up the focus mode. Again, this comes back from a client request. They did not like the fact that they have to hover to get this up here. They wanted that focus mode button on the visual to always be visible. And unfortunately today, there is no way to go in to the settings for the visual header and say like always on. The visual header is something that only comes on when you hover over it. That's just by design. I would like an ability to just tell it per visual, just show it at all times, but that's not a feature available. So instead what I did is I turned it off entirely, which is a setting you can do. Like I'm in desktop mode right now, so it still shows. But as soon as I publish this and it is viewed in reader mode in the service, all of these icons would be gone. And the only thing left that would be there is this focus mode icon in the corner. This was simply something that I went to Google, I searched for royalty-free icon for, I think it was expand that I looked for, and I found something that kind of, looks like a focus mode or an expand symbol, not far removed from, the one that's included into there. And then what I did is I created a bookmark that actually allowed me to capture the focus mode for this and then assign it to that. The bookmark capture itself is pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go over to bookmarks. You can see I already have one here, but I will create it again. And anytime we make a bookmark, we want to have our selection pane open because we want to, 99% of the time, we want to have a chosen selection of visuals to configure when we make our bookmark. So I'm going to select just the visual that I care about. And now all I have to do is focus mode it. There we go. Hit add. And then we can configure this for a few things. Selected visual, number one. Most of the time you make a bookmark, you'll probably want to do this. It's just a good practice in general. So selected visuals. I'm going to call this focus test. Here we go. All right, a couple of other things. Data, I can turn off because I'm not updating anything related to the data. The only thing that I need to have on is display, because that is display is capturing focus mode, spotlight, and visibility. So current page can be turned off. So now that all that I'm left with is selected visuals and display. So we can now close that. And again, the icon here, the way I added that was just using the insert ribbon, and I just added an image from a file. Could have been a JPEG, PNG, etc., like any standard type of image format. And I added it and just resized it into the corner. And what you have for action is just like a button on the page. You can assign back, bookmark, any number one of these. So I'm going to go ahead and just assign focus mode test that I just made. And now holding control so I can activate it. If I click it, we'll see that it is activating the focus mode. So it's one of those other things that people don't think about that much, but there is a solution that provided to a problem, again, with a customer that wanted an always on header that just really wasn't available natively. So the workaround for that is disabling the header, because the only header icon that they cared about was the focus mode. They didn't need any of the other settings. They just wanted the ability to pop it out or in. So I could disable the header entirely. Alternatively, if you need the header plus this icon, both and you don't want it to interfere like this, you can consider maybe then selecting this again, placing it a little bit lower, or you can put it over here. So you can choose a different location for this if you needed this to be included plus some other settings. And at that point, what you would want to do then is you'd want this to be on, but so that people don't have two places to click this. Instead, you can turn off specific icons in here. In this case, let's see, focus mode. There you go. You could turn off just the focus mode icon. So when you publish that, you get the other settings that they might need, but at least the only way that they can now expand it is using this link here. So configuring and enforcing via the configuration of the visuals and everything else is very important. You want to kind of help to drive the right path and make sure that people understand like a clear choice when it comes to implementing some of these features. This one's a pretty quick and easy one, but again, it's just trying to show the ability to have very unique ways of implementing bookmarks. Are there any questions on this one before I move to the next demonstration? And I don't see anything in the chat at the moment, so we'll go ahead and spin up that next one. And where are we at? There we go. Okay. So this one was one of the probably the more enjoyable ones that I've built in the last 6 months. So I'm going to zoom in. And what I did is I configured a button with some fun design practices and principles. Client wanted a radio toggle, and I actually figured out a way to do that with a native button in Power BI. So you can see that it has kind of the 3 states that's being used. We have our right, center, and left in here kind of being toggled back and forth for that. And I actually was able to do that with a native bookmark with a few formatting configurations. My first approach to this, honestly, was thinking of maybe just making a custom image file in PowerPoint or in Photoshop or something like that. And using that to kind of be my primary toggle around. But also anytime you have to import an image, there's a scaling issue sometimes, so it might not render pixel perfect. There's a few other considerations to have. You have to spend the time to make it. And the end goal of what it's toggling, it's just toggling between two visuals. That's less important as the configuration of the buttons themselves, which I have here. So I actually, just like my other bookmark that I talked about, I have two versions of these that are laid on top of each other. And when you select it to toggle the action, it toggles between one or the other as far as the display. So that's how it moves from right to left and from left to right. Excuse me, between each of these. So let me go ahead and move this over, and I want to talk about the formatting for this. So a couple of interesting things to consider as part of the considerations for this. So I'm going to go ahead and open the button text into here and talk about kind of each of these settings just a little bit. So the button text that we still have our default hover and press, and there's a few settings that you can toggle for these that allow me to create that kind of slider effect. So we have, if you notice, horizontal alignment is on the right, and we have in the middle, which is how I get that one, and then we have on press, which is over on the left. So each one of these creates that kind of illusion of sliding back and forth across this. Do it fast enough, and then the animation essentially looks like that. I can't have anything that tracks it in between the two, but it's close enough. It's giving me darn near what I need to for the client's end case. And what I put into here, honestly, I have to zoom out for this. If I hold the Windows key and I do semicolon, I actually have something on Windows 10 or 11 that comes up that is the emoji keyboard. That also apparently can, I think somebody was mentioning to me, yeah, the Windows key and period or semicolon both work to do this. But then if I type in circle, I have all of these things that come up that are various circles. And I wanted a colored circle, and I really liked the little border line that comes into this. So I actually used the white circle that's in here, and I click that, and it basically adds the little emoji that goes into this. That becomes the text that's displaying in there. So the text itself is an emoji icon instead of an ASCII icon. Now, there's a few considerations that I want you to be aware of for this. When you're putting any kind of an emoji icon in here, each operating system that loads this has different libraries. So Windows looks like this. There will be a white icon in the Apple or the Android, the Linux libraries, but they might look slightly different. The Apple one might have a teeny bit of shading on it. So you want to be aware of where these things are being consumed, and for the company, how strict is it when it comes to the actual design and aesthetics that is applied for the that particular organization or company that you're working with. Because if they have one that needs to look a very specific way, you don't want it to accidentally render and look a little bit different depending on the device. So just be aware of the devices you are using. Typically, it's going to be a Windows machine, so most of the time it's not going to be an issue. But if it's being consumed on other stuff, then just be aware of that and look at it to make sure that it still looks okay on the other devices whenever you're using something from the emoji library, just as a small consideration. All right. A couple of other things to mention in here. I'm going to go ahead and open up Outline as well. So this actually is what's allowing me to get these rounded edges in here. That is something where I'm actually using rounded edges. If I actually set that to a pixel, in this case, I was doing, come on, 20. There we go. We'll go back. Come on. There you go. And that gives me that nice little shape, which again goes towards the idea of kind of having a radio toggle button. It flows and shapes with it and gives me that nice rounded edge. So a button now can be highly configured to look much more akin to a lot of other stuff. And the best part is that also those rounded edges still allow stuff from behind it to show up. Come on. There we go. So it's not only rounding it, but it also does make it opaque in those corners. So it really does allow to have that pixel perfect sitting on top of other objects and working together to create a very good shape with that. And you just want to make sure that that's set to all three things on any of the states. But really, like, that's one of many highly customizable features of Button that allows you to shape this to any shape and design that you want for those things. And then just matching the fill color, same thing. Because the outline color actually has the same blue. The one thing that I do find annoying, though, if I turn off outline the rounded edges are still there, which doesn't make sense to me personally, because I can't go and change the rounded edges now. If I wanted to adjust it, I have to come back, I have to put these to 0, and then I have to turn it back off. To me, if I'm turning off outline, it should turn off any setting inside of the outline settings, you know? And so I consider that like a bug, not a feature. But the fact that any settings you have for rounded edges, it stays enforced even if you disable the outline, just as an FYI. So important kind of just thing to note for that. But overall, like that's kind of the formatting that I did for this. The only difference between that one and this is I flipped it, you know, the default versus hover versus click are just reversed versus the top and the bottom one. But the end result with, you know, standard bookmark that you create for that is having that toggleable effect. So I can show that just as a reminder. You can observe that over here. Let's see if I can zoom in just enough to get that to show in a zoom perspective. There you go. Okay, so you will watch the visibility. You know, when I click this one, there you go. The area button becomes visible, or the column button becomes visible. So it's just really for both the visual on the page and the bookmark button, the visibility is just getting toggled back and forth. All right. Are there any questions on this one before I move on to the next one? Again, if you have any questions, feel free just to drop them into the chat window. I'll go ahead and spool up my next one while I'm waiting. Thank you, Henrik. Are there any performance best practices in having bookmarks, the type of visuals that are on the page? That's a great question. Yeah, so let me address that. Essentially, it's performance considerations with bookmarks. The bookmarks themselves really don't have any performance impact. The one thing that does have a performance impact is number of visuals on a page. I will mention that things that are hidden don't have a performance impact on it. They're not rendered until they become visible. So like you may notice, it does it too fast on this one, but the moment that I unhide a visual, that is when the query is executed for the visual, the data is calculated, and it is rendered. If it's hidden, it's fine. So you could have a ton of different visuals that are configured to be toggled and invisible, as long as the number of visuals on a page and objects aren't that many. That's probably the primary thing to consider. Because when you actually load a visual, when you load a report page in a web browser, what it is it's single threaded, meaning that as far as performance and everything else, the browser loads each object kind of one at a time, not in parallel. So essentially, the more visuals you have on a page, whether or not it is a text box, an image, a visual, anything else, does not matter how fast your model is. Eventually, you're going to get a point where if you have like 100 visuals on the page, you're going to get a lot of those little spinning disks each time you open the web browser, or anybody does, because all of those little objects have to render and load the library and the CSS script and everything else that goes into displaying it, regardless of the data that goes into there. That will still take time. So you want to minimize the number of visible objects on a page at once when it comes to performance. And ways around that, I've seen people have bookmarks where you can toggle quadrants of the data at once if there's too many things loaded at the same time, or just split the report pages. Try to avoid too many objects on the page at once. But that in general is where some of those considerations come into play. And that's actually a great segue into my next video, or my next demonstration, that will actually talk about a bit of performance considerations with unique objects on the page. I think I see one more question. Are there any courses you recommend to design in Power BI? As you mentioned, this is an area with few resources. It's a great question. It's also a soft promotion of the course that I am doing at the Data Platform Summit. I have a full day of designing impactful reports in Power BI that I'll be teaching in a few weeks. A little bit later this year, that is going to be covering pretty much the end-to-end of the front end of stuff. It's kind of an extension of this, but what I do is I go through pretty much all of the report features in Power BI, such as bookmarks, report tooltips, drill through, and I cover the end-to-end features from the front end perspective, so you understand the art of possible, what is available in Power BI to use, so then you can ensure that you know what features are available to suggest or provide to the client when you're building out these report pages, understanding what can be toggled for the visual header, what configurations and considerations do you want when you publish this, making sure that, issues like this where you get like unnecessary pop-ups that show up, those are all the types of things that I kind of cover over this full day training. So if you are looking for like more of this type of content to consume, I'd recommend checking that out on the DPS site. And I think Amit can probably drop or whomever's moderating right now can probably drop a link for that in the chat. But otherwise, for the performance consideration of multiple objects on the page, this is a great segue to my next demonstration that I have right here. This one. All right. So with this one, I'm also utilizing buttons, but in a clever and unique way. So with a lot of my inspirations, I was provided this from a client who really just had a very specific design that they wanted to do. This is an enterprise client that I have that often essentially just gives me a mock-up of, hey, we want a dashboard that looks like this, figure out how to build a model, and then here's the visuals that we want. And this was one of them. They wanted a visual that, if I select some things here, has a couple of KPIs. It has a number, kind of a health bar, so to speak, up or down. Doesn't really matter what the data is. I just have, in this case, this number, there's a plan. It's 10% below, so it's red. It's 18% up, so it is green. Going up or down, just depending on that. And that was kind of the end result of it. So there is no visual that does this. There's no card that has all three of these objects in here. So when that came up, I was like, all right, how do I build this? And I started in kind of this perspective. I was able to make each card using 3 objects. So I'll kind of dissect this a bit for you. Here's my card. But if I actually ungroup it, I have 1, 2, 3. I have 3 different things that are made out here. The top thing, that is a single value card, just with a dollar amount in there. Middle object, that is actually a button. What I've done is I've taken a button, I have made it very skinny. And the only thing that I did is, made it into a little strip. That little strip kind of just, sits right there. Yeah, I actually, there we go, sitting in the back. But the one configuration that I did for this, and I'll show you the better version in a second. All I did is I went to fill. At any time you see this symbol, that means, there we go. That means I can supply a measure in there. And the measure just has a little bit of logic that allows, that it says, should it be one color or the other? So I'll show you the measure briefly. But again, the goal of this isn't really to show you how to write the DAX. It's to show you how to utilize a button for something more clever and unique. So the KPI colors in here, very basic calculation. All I have is a variable with a hex code for green, hex code for red. If this amount is greater than or equal to 0, display green, otherwise display red. As long as I have a measure that exports text in a hex code, I'm allowed to use that in any of these, any location that I have these little symbols. And basically now it dynamically changes the color based on whatever logic that I have included in the measure. So this was my first version of this, but as I just discussed in the last demonstration, 3 different objects in here, it looks fine. It works exactly as needed. But if I need 5 or 6 of these cards on my page, that's 5 times 3. I now have 15 unique objects that have to render on the page for 5 cards. That is starting to get a lot of those little gears spinning all over the page because it's, it's just a consideration you have to include. So the end result that I did, and this was a few years ago, and nowadays I probably might build something like this if people are not familiar with it. There's a tool called Charticulator that lets you actually make your own custom visuals. You can go that route and actually build it from scratch. But at the time, I was just doing layering to try to make a visual myself. So I found a way to do this with just 2 objects. Same thing, looks pretty much the same as the last card, right? Bring this over here. I'm going to ungroup this though. So now though, what I've managed to do is I have a top and a bottom section. So it's still more than 1, but 2 isn't that bad. And I only had 4 of these on the page. So that was 8 objects, which it does not actually take that long to load. And my general golden rule, by the way, if you want to ever know, is it too much? Does it take too long? About 3 to 4 seconds should be the limit. By the time like somebody clicks a page to load, if you have gears spinning on a regular basis that takes more than 3 to 4 seconds for that page to initially load, or for a slicer, when you click it, for everything to reload, that's when you want to start looking at ways to trim the fat to make it faster, either reducing the visuals, increasing the performance of the measure. Just as a quick side mention, when you are doing performance evaluations, the performance analyzer is a great way to do that. That's when you can, basically see all the milliseconds taken for everything, and then you can start figuring out where are my highest and lowest perpetrators for time, and starting to do an analysis to see how much that's done. But I just wanted to mention that's there briefly. It's just under the view ribbon in here. It's a great way to help figure out what's taking the longest on my page to render. But overall, I've now gotten from 3 to 2. And the way that I did this is this here is actually still a button. I still have the button at the top, but the clever thing that I did on this one is I included the number in my title. So the title itself also has an f of x symbol. So instead of just, title in there, I can supply it with a measure, and that measure can also be dynamic. So Control Z, there we go. So that over here is actually, as long as you have a measure that returns text, it can't be an actual number. It can look like a number, but it has to be formatted and converted essentially to a text format. So in here, what I have, there we go, completed amount. All I've done is I've just taken, my data and I formatted it. So in this case, I formatted it to, also include commas if the number's high enough. But what this does, the format function, that takes whatever value you give it, it converts it to text, and then it just displays it in whatever format you provide, whether or not it's a number or a date or anything else. It will always, though, output text. And that means that then I can actually come into here and I can choose that. Notice that, by the way, completed various amount, I can't click that because that still is a number. The data type for this is numerical, not text. This is text, so I can select it. Anything that is actually text can be added into here because that's the only type of, that's the only data type that it accepts. So you do have to create an extra measure, but it's a small cost. Maybe you have 3 or 4 extra measures in the model where you have completed amount or some amount, and then some amount that's been formatted to text specifically for the card. But as long as you use folders and other stuff like this, you can organize it very well. And then the end result is now I have 2 objects to render instead of 3. So that is kind of how I arrived at this conclusion for this. Is I used a button. The button itself does not have any action assigned. It does nothing other than I'm really just using it as a fill bar. Now, I will say that I could have done this with a text box as well. Same kind of principle that I could have done. I could have had this. Here we go. And I'll just color it in just to give you an example of what I mean. Here we go. So if I do that, title, close enough. Yeah, do a title and then the text itself. And then there's an option if I wanted to, I can make the background below it, a certain color and all that. So I could have used a text box, but in general, what I find annoying during development is that this always pops up. And I just don't like the little text pop-up. Sometimes it blocks my other visuals. So I just find it cleaner to use a button, but I could have used a text box for a similar effect. But buttons to me are very versatile in so many different uses besides an actual clickable action. In this case, I turned it into a color bar because of all of the different settings that I can format into here. The bottom one is just a single value card that has a static title for completed and just a measure that is a concatenation of some percentages and variables. But again, the goal of this, it really isn't to walk through the DAX that much. I'll just show it up here just so you can see it a bit. But as you can see, some very fun ways to utilize that and to make your own visuals. Nowadays, like I said, there's kind of a pro con with both. You can make a custom visual by layering visuals together to make your own card, in this case, so to speak. Most of the time, my custom visuals are cards on the page for clients, but you also have tools like the Charticulator. I actually have a couple of videos on that on my channel of a live stream from Daniel Marsh-Patrick, who he's down in New Zealand. He's another MVP who entirely specializes in custom visuals. And there's tools these days that actually let you build something like this, but completely from scratch. So you can just have one object on the page. So it kind of goes through a pro and con of which takes more effort. Again, if you are hitting less than like 3 to 4 seconds for these to load on the page, that's fine. If you really are to a point where you need to shave every millisecond off of the report page to get it to perform faster, maybe consider trying to make something like this as a custom visual instead. But overall, are there any questions on this visual? I think before we actually probably wrap up after this one for general questions. So I see that we are at about 5 till. So let's go ahead and do that. Broaden it up and just have any general questions to wrap up for the day. Actually, oh, I do see the Q&A panel. Okay, let me put that separately up. Let's see. I see some from here. Are there any performance best practices in having bookmarks? So yeah, I answered that one. How do we do this when the data set is direct query? If you can ask that one again, sorry, I missed it earlier, but is that related to the buttons that I have onto the page for the direct query question? I'm just not sure because this should work fine against any model as long as it has measures in it. If you do this against like a Power BI data set, I can still go into the button and configure it and say, hey, I want the I want the fill color to use a measure from the model. It doesn't matter if it's import or a live connection or a composite model. I still have these options to do this formatting. And then I see one last question. Is it better to create these measures on the PBX file or in the data model before? PBX file. So right now, creating these in the PBX file is the same as the data model. This is an import data model. What I think you might be getting to is that what you can do is you can create a core data model. It's totally fine. You can create a core data model, publish it, and then you can create additional measures against it. So to that question, what I will say is, best practice normally with Power BI is you have a golden data set, typically one core model, and then a ton of reports that service it. Yeah. So if you have one single report that you need a measure for, like let's assume it's like this format one. If you only have one report that's needed, go ahead and create that in the connected in the report that's connected to the live model, because you can do that. And because it's only needed for one report, there's no reason to add the complexity and the cost back into the core model. If that calculation, the DAX measure that you're making, if that's going to be used by multiple reports, that's when you want to consider adding it to the core model. So just kind of like consider anytime you're adding a new calculation, as you're building a report connected to a live model, ask yourself, hey, is this only needed for my report, or are there other reports that could benefit from using this? And then whether or not you're the owner, or if you have to communicate with the person who's the manager of that model, maybe let them know, open a ticket, or just have an inquiry on like, hey, I'm writing this new measure. Can we add this to this folder in the DAX measures folder in the enterprise core model that we have? So that would be kind of my 2 cents on those two. I do have a couple of slides that I want to bring up while I'm actually finishing this up. So let me pull this up. There we go. So as I'm finishing answering any questions, the QR code here takes you to my main site. And I'll have a couple of links as well for DPS. But I put my presentation PDF up, also links to some consulting services and other types of trainings that are unrelated to the one that I'll be doing at DPS, which we'll also promote here in a minute. And I also just provide a QR code for anybody that attends, just, it's a discount for any of like the files and stuff that I sell on my website, kind of as a thank you just for attending and giving an hour of your time to hear me talk about some cool stuff. If you like this content, also check out the recording later. That will be on DPS's YouTube. Also, I do have my own YouTube channel where I do a live stream every Friday with a guest on somebody from the industry, very cool topics related to Power BI. This week is actually going to be about version control that I'm doing in a few days on how to use GitHub and a few others. So that's going to be a pretty fun topic. So please check that out on my YouTube channel if you're interested. And then feel free to ping me on LinkedIn if you have any other questions as well. I'll leave this up for just a minute, check if there's any other questions, and then I'll also show the closing slides as well for DPS. I don't think there's any other questions. And I can copy and paste these into the chat in just a second. Here we go. There we go. All right. But yeah, otherwise, like I want to thank all of you guys for attending today. This has been awesome. It looks like I had about 26, 27 people that were attending today. So I really always enjoy people taking the time out of the day to do this. It gives me, it's rewarding for me, and I just really like sharing with the community. Check out of course, the link for the data platform. If you guys are curious on that full day training that I'm providing as well, that will be over 2 days. I will be doing that later on this year, and it's going to basically cover everything about like design and practices from the front end perspective and report design in Power BI. But other than that, I think that should be good. Looks like there's a link for some feedback as well that was just dropped into the chat. So if you could fill that out, I really enjoy getting that every time. Constructive feedback helps me and any presenter learn and grow. This is an evolving process. So, you know, we always want to see what works and doesn't with presentations. So it's highly valuable for both the conference organizers and myself if you can do that. But otherwise, that's everything from my end. I mean, I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to say to wrap up.
All right, friends, with this, we will end today's webinar. And yeah, please do make sure that you visit Data Platform Virtual Summit and yeah, look for RAID's class there, dataplatformvirtualsummit.com. And thank you very much. Have a good day. Make sure that you sign up for next week's webinar on Tuesday and Thursday. Thank you. Have a good weekend, all of you. Goodbye.